Hey, I'm Caleb with YouCanMakeThisToo. Today I'm going to be talking about the 4 things that I like to do on my table saw pretty frequently to keep it humming really well. If your saw doesn't match mine, just make sure to check your owner's guide, and before doing anything, always make sure you unplug your saw. This is one part I'm actually pretty good at, is keeping everything cleaned out, because it's kind of satisfying. Once I get most of the dust sucked up, I get it all dirty again. Use my air compressor and, just anything that's kind of caked on, try to blow off. And I really make sure to get around my bearings and all my racks and whatnot. One tip on blowing things out I like to do is take out my saw blade and insert, turn on the dust collector, and get in there with my air compressor, and that way the dust collector pulls everything out. So right now, this is the blade down mode. Also make sure to raise the blade so that way I can clean off that rack or gear, trunnion, whatever you call it, but now I can get in there and blow it off good. Now, my worm screw that raises and lowers tends to stay pretty clean because I go up and down a lot, but I don't miter this very much. So this one gets a little dirtier, so just use a little brush to get in all the teeth, get them a little cleaner. And once I get it all clean, I'll get in there with a dry lube and make sure to cycle that with the dry lube. You want to use something that's silicone free and preferably a dry lube, because anything too greasy is just going to collect a lot of sawdust and build up gunk. There are some specialty products, but most people use paste wax to seal their tabletop, which does 2 things. It's rust prevention and also lubricate, so that way your whatever stock you're using slides well. But I'm in Memphis, which is a very high humidity area, and I've noticed the wax just doesn't offer enough protection from the humidity, and I still get surface rust really easy. So I like using a water-based polyurethane. Here I'm using Total Boat Halcyon. This is my first time using Halcyon. Used to use polyacrylic. The trick is water-based tends to be really thick. You can thin the Total Boat up to 20%. So I've got 75 mils of poly, 15 mils of water to thin it out, because we're going as thin as possible. The polyurethane isn't really going to lubricate the top, but it's just going to be a much more durable and less permeable barrier for water to help keep rust from building up on the table saw. Now, if you do have some surface rust buildup, my normal treatment is just 220 on my random orbit sander, and I'll sand the whole thing just to knock off the surface rust. That's not enough. It's not really going to gouge your top or anything, and that'll get all the rust off and to be ready for whatever finish. If you have wax, make sure you use something to de-wax it and clean it off first. And I'll do 1 or 2 coats of this, sanding in between because I don't want any lines or unevenness on my top. And then after that, I'll wax it really good. Because again, the poly doesn't lubricate, the wax will lubricate. The poly is just going to give me a much stronger water shield. All right, with my poly, I rubbed it on, gave it some time to dry, hit it with like a 400, and then did another coat so it'd be nice and smooth. Now I'm just coming back with my paste wax. This is what's going to give it the glide so wood moves easy, and just rub it on, let it dry, buff it off. So there's basically 3 things we need to do to our blades: clean them, sharpen them, and replace them. And I don't do either of those as often as I should, so let's clean this. These have been soaking for about 5 minutes, and I cleaned off my workbench to have a better place to clean these. I used to use a 5-gallon bucket and paint thinner or mineral spirits, but Rockler sent me out this kit, and it's a lot easier, way more handy. It comes with concentrate. You add it 3-to-1 to water, and this tub, which is a lot easier than a 5-gallon bucket because you're not reaching way down in there, but a 10-inch blade will fit in the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket. If it's not cutting as well, like you're getting a lot of burning, too much resistance, so you're really having to push your wood hard to get it to cut, then look at it. If it's dirty, clean it. If that doesn't help, you need to sharpen it or replace it. If you've gotten your blades at a big box store, then they're probably not made to be resharpened and you just need to replace them. The big difference between when you get the big box store blades or I like Freud Industrial is the size of the carbide. This has a pretty big carbide piece, so there's room to grind and sharpen this. On the big box stuff, the carbide's a lot smaller. That's why they're less expensive, but there's no room to sharpen it. Next, we're going to be talking about blade and fence alignment, which isn't just about performance. This is a huge safety issue. If you don't feel like you're getting the cuts you should be, or you're having kickback a lot and you're sure you're using the right technique, check your alignment. There's a good chance that it's off. Now, the first thing I do with this is get my blade set to 90, which this says it's 90, so that's good enough for me. 0, 0. And what we're going to do is set the blade and the fence both parallel with the miter slot. I used to do this with just a dial indicator, which is one of these, and a scrap piece of wood. I can't find it though, and my buddy Andrew was nice enough to let me borrow this saw gauge, so I'm going to be using this. But you definitely don't have to invest in one of these to be able to do this. Get a Harbor Freight dial indicator and make a little jig to slide in your miter track. And the idea here is we just want to make sure that the blade is tracking with the miter saw, that they're parallel in line. So pick a tooth that don't want to be right on the tooth because that's going to be harder to track. Make a mark. I'm right here. I'm going to set the dial indicator to 0. Okay, and then just keep my finger on that tooth. That's okay, let it set, come back here. All right, good, and I'm within half a thou. You can see that's halfway between the 0 on the next line, so it's half a thou. Within 3/1000 is good, so this is still a good setup. Now, on my saw, if that wasn't good, I'd have to loosen the 4 bolts that hold the table to the base. There's one, and there's 2 in the front. And then shimmy the table around until everything was in line. Most cabinet saws work that way, although some saws you might have to adjust the trunnions. Just check your owner's manual and it'll tell you how to align it. Now that I know my blade's in line, I'm going to check my fence. So let me get my blade out of the way and slide my fence over. And I don't use indicators much, so I always test it. So if I push the indicator in, the needle goes that way, which means if it went out, the needle would go that way. Kind of intuitive in this position. And what I want to see is that the back of the fence is about 3 to 5 thousandths farther out that way than the beginning of the fence. And what that ensures is that as the pieces get fed, they don't bind against the table saw and cause kickback. If it was perfectly in line, okay, but higher chance of kickback. If this is tipped in towards the blade, very high chance of kickback because the fence will be pushing material into the back of the blade, which is how kickback happens. So you want it set out just a little bit. It's not going to mess up your cuts, but it'll prevent kickback. And mine is about 4 thousandths out. Let's check one more time. Back to 0. Back to 4. So no adjustments necessary. I have the Delta Unisaw, which isn't a super common fence, but any premium fence is going to be pretty easy to adjust because they want you to be able to calibrate it. I just use these 2 screws. They're both tied to plastic pads that run against the rails, so move those in and out and that'll swing the blade. And I've learned the easiest way to do it is put the indicator on the far end so you can watch it, then make your adjustment until the indicator's right where you want it. I also have these 2 on top to adjust the vertical of the fence. I know mine's good, but might be something else you want to check while you're at it. Another thing you can do to get great performance is make a 0 clearance insert. I've got a video coming out really soon on how I make this and in general techniques to eliminate and reduce tear out whenever you're doing any cutting. Of course, follow your saw's manufacturer's advice. This is just what I do, and make sure you unplug your saw before you start reaching around in the guts. But yeah, all you got to do is do some rust prevention. I like some water-based polyurethane. Make sure your blade and fence are tracking to your miter gauge. Keep things cleaned and lubricated. and make sure you're cleaning, sharpening, and replacing your blades as they need it, and you're going to enjoy your time at the saw a whole lot more. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something or at least entertained. Please, if I missed anything you feel is important, let me know below, or at least let me know what you're working on. I love hearing what you guys are doing. And until next time, make time to make something.